Welcome to the Rockabye Revenue podcast with me, Abby Watson. I'm a mum of 4 and a business strategist, and I train people to become hypnobirthing teachers. In the last decade, I've built a thriving baby business that grew beyond my wildest dreams. This podcast is for you if you run a business or dream of running a business in the birth and baby industry. You want to change lives whilst making more money. I'm talking about creating sustainable income whilst being present for the people that matter most. I believe for our baby businesses to have the impact we desire, we must be rewarded. On this podcast, expect me to share actionable strategies without the jargon. I've been where you are. I've built a business while raising 4 little ones, and now I'm here to help you turn your passion into profit while creating the life you've always dreamed of. So let's get started. A lovely one. Welcome to an episode of Rockabye Revenue, and today I am talking about those classes that we all have. Mark my words, we all have them, even if we don't hear people talking about them. Those sessions that just felt like they didn't go well. And we sat there overthinking all the things that we wish we'd have done differently. And we almost feel like, icky about ourselves in our role because what we've just done just didn't feel up to scratch. So I'm going to be sharing my experience of this recently and what we all need to learn from these sessions. Now, before I go into that, I want to give you a bit of an update because last episode was about when people ghost you. Yeah, did you listen to that? If you didn't, go back and have a listen to that episode after today's. It was all about like when someone gets in touch and they seem dead keen and then they just seem to vanish off the face of the earth, and you follow up and you hear nothing and you're like, oh my gosh, that is so weird. And it feels really frustrating. So I was talking about that on the last episode, and I was talking about how that had blooming happened to us in our selling our home escapades, and how we had this, such keen couple, really keen on our house, offer us, and then just vanish. Now, great news, and I suppose this kind of like proves the point of what I was talking about last time. They've got back in touch and they're still as keen as ever. And isn't it easy to go into that spiral of, they've just changed their mind? And yeah, they hadn't. They'd just kind of not seen the messages from the estate agent. They were in the thick of preparing their own home for sale. And yeah, they just kind of thought, they'll get back in touch later. And all these stories that myself and probably the estate agent too had been telling ourselves were just not true. So there you go. There's the reminder that exactly what I was saying last time. When someone appears to have ghosted us, it doesn't necessarily mean they're not interested. In other news, if you have been listening to this podcast for a while, you'll know the absolute struggles I've been having liaising with my local council to get my son, Harris, a place at a school that can meet his needs, because he has got autism and he's got, real difficulties accessing education. And it has been a long journey, and not last week but the week before we had amazing news that the council have agreed, without us having to go to tribunal, which was, we have a date for next year, the end of blooming 2026, but without having to go there, they have agreed that he does need a specialist placement. So, oh my gosh, like fingers crossed, let's hope in a couple of months at least he will have a place that he can attend and thrive again. So I thought I'd update you on that. I mean, it has definitely not been the end of the battle because, oh, you don't even want to know what happened last week. But yeah, they consulted with some schools that would be highly inappropriate, that ultimately are for children that have been excluded from schools because of extremely distressing behaviour. Harris is highly sensitive. I can't even imagine how he would cope in an environment like that. I mean, I'd never let him go. I'd never let him go to a school that was going to be so damaging to him, but it felt like, oh, so he's like, you know, jumping out of the frying pan into the fire or whatever the phrase is, because them suggesting that school just felt, oh my gosh, this is even worse than where he currently is for him. So yeah, that's my update. You might also notice that I am totally full of cold, and I am recording regardless. I'm almost like I need to record these episodes that I'm sitting down to record today right now before my throat gets any worse, because how am I going to blimmin' record a podcast episode if I lose my voice? Betsy, my youngest, she's off school today, totally full of cold too. So her and Harris are literally next door in the next room, watching K-pop Demon Hunters. So I'm hoping I can grab half an hour to complete recording this podcast episode. So today is very much working around my family imperfectly. You know, there's so many reasons why I could have waited to sit down and do this work today, but actually I'm doing it anyway. So let that be your reminder that you can also take that imperfect action too. Anyway, let's get on with today's episode. So I'm talking about when a class feels like it went wrong, when it feels like it was crap, it was horrible, and it's left you with really icky feelings, and maybe also a bit of a reluctance to do anything similar again. Now, I'm talking about this today because that was absolutely what happened to me last week, and I'm still feeling it. I'm still feeling the hangover of that right now. And I want to explain that feeling and what I've learned from it and what you should learn from this too. Because wherever you are in your baby business journey and whatever you do in your baby business, you will absolutely have work days that felt like that was not my best work. That was not good. And it's not about us trying to avoid those days. Yeah, we can stack the odds in our favour, but it's not about like preventing them from ever happening. We can't do that. It's more about knowing that when those days happen, we can't let them define ourselves as a business owner. We can't let them define how we feel about ourselves in our role. So, last week then, I did a CPD for my students and graduates. So every 2 months, myself or I get a guest in to do a CPD, and everybody, you know, whether they trained with me last month or whether they trained with me 4 years ago, can access these trainings, and it's all part and parcel of what you get at Love Your Birth when you train with us. We don't charge extra fees. It's just part of our wonderful community and part of our, like enriching you as a hypnobirthing teacher. So last week's episode was one that not a blooming episode. I'm getting confused with this podcast. Last week's session was all about supporting neurodivergent hypnobirthing clients. And, you know, if you know me at all, you'll know this is an issue, this is a thing very close to my own heart. You know, with 4 neurodivergent children, I have absolutely been down a rabbit hole researching neurodivergence and very much so its impact on learning and its impact on accessing classes and all that kind of thing. Because, much of my life is blooming advocating for my children to get an education that's not traumatizing them, that's not, that's actually benefiting them. Let's be honest, that's what I'm trying to do with them. And of course, as a result, it absolutely makes me think about hypnobirthing clients because and my students and how I can be a better educator, because many of the people that I will come across will absolutely be neurodivergent, whether or not they know it themselves, because the generation that many of us are in, there's a lot of women in particular that are undiagnosed, because it wasn't known about in the same way it is today. There was many views of it that have absolutely changed these days. So for example, if we take autism, 30 years ago when I was a kid, it was pretty much only thought that boys could be autistic. There was such a view of it that unless, you were lining up trains, unless you were non-verbal, you weren't autistic, you were just painfully shy, very particular, a bit of a fusspot, maybe oversensitive, maybe socially awkward, maybe a bit weird, but you weren't autistic. So the reason I'm saying this is because this is why, as people that host classes, it can be really useful to have a bit of an understanding of neurodivergence, because ultimately there will be people that attend our classes, whether we're a baby massage instructor or whether we're a hypnobirthing teacher, that we will come across, and some of their difficulties in coming to our classes may stem from their neurodivergence. So I did a CPD around this last week, and a few weeks ago I was dead excited for it. I was so looking forward to applying everything I'd learned in the last few years to, my passion, educating people about birth. So I was really excited about this CPD, but I definitely underestimated how much time it was going to take for me to prepare it to be to my standards, to be an exceptional workshop. So in the days before the workshop, I was absolutely beavering away preparing for this workshop, and it definitely dominated a lot of my time last week. But of course, I had a lot of other things going on. I also had just a really anxious week last week. I don't know why. I don't know whether it was because the previous week I'd been on such a high that the council had agreed that Harris could have a specialist place. That I'd been on such a high that I'd almost come down from that with a bang, and I just felt really low, to be honest. And I felt really worried that we'd not heard any further after that. That agreement. I also felt very much in decision fatigue about our upcoming house move, where we're going to move, are we going to regret it, all those kind of things. So I was just not feeling myself at all. Now, this is relevant because I truly believe that when we are not feeling our best selves, of course, our perception of our work will be different. When we're feeling emotionally low, of course we won't be feeling wow, I absolutely nailed that class, that workshop. Okay, right, I'm back. I actually had to nip out of the room then because there was some kind of chaos unfolding with Harris and Betsy. But they seem all right now, so I'm going to try and get back to this. Now, of course, I can't remember what I was talking about, but I think I was talking about when we have a bit of a crappy week, when we're not feeling our best, when we're feeling tired, when we're feeling anxious, when we're feeling sad, when we're feeling stressed, when we're feeling any of these things, no matter how good our class was, our perception of it might be really, really different. Now, going back to my session then, so I'd really spent a lot of time planning this session, but yet I felt like I could have done with even more time. Now, I knew this CPD session was going to be longer than a lot of the CPD sessions that we do at Love Your Birth. So I try to usually keep them to about an hour. And I'd already said to people this is going to be about 90 minutes to 2 hours, this, because, there's so much to cover in this when we're talking about supporting neurodivergent clients. But yet, it still went on a lot longer than that. And that again gave me feelings of, oh gosh, like they weren't expecting to be sat here this whole time. I'm bombarding them with information. I felt a little bit like, oh, I'm really not practicing what I preach here. I talk a lot about less is more. And I feel like, oh, maybe I have jam-packed this a little bit too much. When it came to the session, there was a lovely group of women that joined. So lovely, so keen to know more, so understanding, and yeah, just really like taking an active part in the workshop, which was fabulous. It really was. But still, I just didn't feel right. And, anyone in our community that goes and watches this recording, I bet you can tell that the first half an hour at least, I was really nervous. I felt nervous about doing this workshop, perhaps because it was brand new. It wasn't something that I usually talk about. It wasn't teaching hypnobirthing specifically. It was using knowledge that, I gained for myself and I don't normally share with others. So I was really nervous about it. And I was also sharing some really vulnerable information on that episode because I was referring to my own experiences and experiences of my children. So yeah, I felt really quite vulnerable, and you'll know that I'm quite an oversharer generally. I'm quite comfortable on the whole with being vulnerable, but it did feel that extra step, and there were times at the start of the session where I felt very almost tearful, speaking out loud about the things that are so much in my head. Felt sad. It did. And I didn't expect to have that reaction. And then because I'd had that reaction, I then almost felt, I felt thrown off by that. So yeah, the session in itself, like the feedback was wonderful. It really was. Which again shows you that a lot of other people didn't think it was as crap as I thought it was. But after I'd done that workshop, all I could think about was the things I'd not included and wanted to include. The words that maybe I got tangled up. Because, yeah, I stumble on my words sometimes. And whether I'd overshared, what people were thinking about that, how people felt like having to stay longer. And, don't get me wrong, they didn't have to, and I did make that really clear that they were free to leave at any point. But I know people can feel really uncomfortable with leaving and they didn't want to offend me. And no one did leave, which was lovely. But I know some people might have really needed to leave. So yeah, I was left feeling really crappy about that session. And there were definitely feelings of delete it, redo it, and put it on the online platform. No, I didn't. I didn't delete it, and it's there in its original form, totally imperfectly. And yeah, that feels right now quite icky. And I almost don't want to direct people to it, even though I know there's some valuable information in there. because it just doesn't feel my best work. And I really thought this was useful to share with you on this podcast, because I know you'll have times like that. I know you might do a session, the first ever session of a group course, and you might feel like, oh my God, that really didn't go well. I'm cringing. Did they hate it? Did I say this bit wrong? Did I go over the top with this? You might, change your sessions up a bit, feel really excited about the change, and then deliver it and be like, oh God, that was the wrong move. I would absolutely bet that we've all had sessions like that or times like that in our business. But we don't always hear that because, of course, we only see the sunny side of social media, don't we? We see when that business owner says, my session today was fabulous. I loved meeting my clients and all this. Of course we do, because our social media is for marketing. But that can make us feel like nobody else has those experiences. So I wanted to share that with you today to let you know it's really normal to have sessions where we feel like it wasn't our best work, and that we maybe sat there thinking, oh, I should have said this, I should have done that. Oh, how frustrating that I didn't get time to do this that was going to be so useful for them. Because that's what I was left feeling. When I'd planned the workshop, I'd planned for us to go out into breakout rooms. I'd planned for us to do an exercise about literal language. We didn't get to do any of those things. And I felt really frustrated by that. But I tell you what, those people who watch that workshop don't know. Well, you do now if you've listened to this podcast. But those that attended live didn't know what I planned to do. So any bits of my session that I didn't get to do or didn't work as well as I hoped, no one really knew any different, because they'd not seen my session plan I'd created. And you need to also remember that too. Give yourself permission to have sessions that are imperfect. You're a human, you're not a robot. And of course, sometimes your words will come out. You'll forget bits. You'll miss out bits. You won't have time for things. Sessions might be a bit longer than you'd anticipated. Or you just feel a bit not yourself. Give yourself permission to be imperfect. Because I tell you what, it's not the sessions that went really well that we'll learn the most from. It's not the session that you leave like beaming from ear to ear that we gain the most from. It is those sessions where we feel rubbish. Because of course we'll reflect on them. And some of the things we'll reflect on, there'll be nothing to learn from because it was entirely out of our control. But there will be bits where we're like, actually, if I was to do this again, I'd do that. And this is all what makes you experienced and confident at what you do. It's the rough rather than the smooth that teaches you that. And this is absolutely, what I talk about when I'm training hypnobirthing teachers. Our sessions won't always go really, really well. The majority will feel great. The majority will leave you on a high. But sometimes it might feel icky. And these are the sessions that we will learn the most from. And I tell you what, confidence doesn't come from perfection. Confidence doesn't come from perfection. It comes from sticking with it, even when it feels hard or uncomfortable. And that's what I want to leave you with today. So lovely one, if you're ever beating yourself up about a session that just didn't feel right, an appointment that just didn't feel right, whatever you do in your business and it just didn't feel right, that's okay. That's totally okay. And we've all been there. And no doubt your clients didn't think that. And even if they did, even if they did, not everything that we pump out there has to be 100%. Now, I shall see you next week for another episode of Rockabye Revenue. And next week, we are going to be talking about the reality when it feels like crickets in our marketing. You know, when we post something on social media and, you know, we get one like and it's from his auntie, and, you know, we get another like and it's from, you know, our ex-colleague, and we're feeling like what we are putting out there is just not hitting the mark. We're going to talk about the invisible side of our impact. So I shall see you next time for another episode of Rockabye Revenue. Take care. Bye. Thank you for listening to Rockabye Revenue. I hope this episode has left you with some fresh ideas and bundles of motivation. If you enjoyed this episode, do make sure you click subscribe so you never miss an installment. And if you found this episode useful, I'd love you forever if you leave a 5-star review, helping this podcast reach the ears of more of the helpers in this world. And remember, keep changing lives. See you next time.